Okay, maybe it's streaming. Hey, David. Ritesh.
Hey, Toddy. Hey, everybody.
I hear you're not feeling well today, David.
Yeah, a little under the wire weather.
Hope you recover soon.
Thanks.
Okay, let's maybe start at 9:05. Pritesh, we expect somebody else from your side to join? Vani, Milind.
Vani should be joining. Milling would join late.
Okay.
This one isn't sure, so we'll join late. Vani should be joining.
Okay, let's give her 2 minutes and we can get started. Sorry, I saw MG joining.
That's
Uh,
Milind, I think.
oh, that's Milind. Okay. Milind, I forgot that you go with just the initials. I think we have Milind and Fanny, so I don't know whether somebody else will join, but if you guys want to get started, the only topic I had for today is really brainstorming discussion about TUF and in total attestations. Uh, James, we chatted with you the other day uh, in our call, and we said that we want to kind of really brainstorm on the scenarios today. So that's what I added um, to the agenda. Do you want to kind of maybe start with your thoughts or?
Yeah, I can give you some of my thoughts. It's not very well formed, but I'm happy to start to kick things off. So currently we're Docker looking at how to represent tough metadata in the registry. And initially for us the focus is on Docker official images. So and distributing trust policy um, in tough and in tough metadata for a Docker official images. So we're trying to start small rather than a full general solution that this project would want to look at. And so um, the the problems of porting or mirroring that metadata is kind of a little bit less severe. We could imagine a single repository containing all the tough metadata for, say, Docker official images, and that would need to be mirrored, of course. But we could imagine a mirror working. So the client would have a list of supported mirrors, and if it's being mirrored somewhere unsupported, so like your internal Artifactory or whatever, then that would be a client's responsibility to configure that as a mirror, and the client, our client whether it be like Docker pull or whatever, or our libraries or whatnot would support doing that mapping inside the code. So that's currently what we're thinking when it comes to the basic mirroring use case. But we're also looking at adapting Tough either via the Poof framework or some taps to make it a little bit more appropriate for OCI, because snapshots don't really make sense in the same context. That they're the big attack vector that they defend against is mix and match attacks. So do we really need those? So do you really need a big, if you're signing tags, that is, as soon as you start to sign image tags, which is the probably the most important use case for Tough and OCI, where Tough can actually protect the images, is to prevent the downgrade attack. So you really need to sign the tags. But do you really need to collect them all up and put them into a snap.json file and put that in the registry and then sign that with a timestamp? Seems like a lot of work and a lot of churn for not much gain. And I think we know there are scalability issues with doing that as well, that were identified by the Tough project. And I think, forget which tap it is, tap 16, I think, looks at putting Merkle trees in. But of course, most registries are backed by Merkle trees and already have a tag digest database. So we think there's maybe something there where we can represent the Tough metadata in different ways, potentially, and simplify the models a little bit, but still provide the same guarantees. I kind of started writing that up, but it's nowhere near ready for review. It's literally working on it today, but I would be like to share it with this group as well as the Tough community as well. But that's as far as my thinking on the subject has gone. I know you've got some other use cases, Toddy, that you mentioned the other day, that I'd love to bring into the mix.
Yeah. Before that, it's kind of a question. So you're saying that actually want to get the root metadata as part of the client. That means that, let's say, the Docker client will have that root metadata for the most popular registries. Is that what you guys are thinking of, or?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, in the first instance, it only makes sense for us to put Docker's root in Docker's tools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think everyone would appreciate that, so that Docker's content works seamlessly with Docker's tools. And so where we have a footprint in the client, which tends to be Docker pull, Docker build, Docker run, then we would hope to try and get our root integrated there. And then the mechanism for delegating to other trusted content and registries, I think, is very open. I don't think there's anything there, and I know that Justin from the Tough project is very interested in what we want to do there, because he wants Tough everywhere and to be the Tough for all registries and bring it all together, centralize it quite a lot. But I don't know how that really plays out in a distributed world with public and private and so on.
Yeah, one thought that I had about that is because, like, similar to containers, actually registries are created and destroyed quite often, right? Like, you can imagine that they are like, unlike, for example, the mirrors for package managers, where, let's say, PyPy has, I don't know, even 100 mirrors, let's say, around the world. Like, you can imagine there were tens of thousands, even not hundreds of thousands of registries created. And I, for example, go and create and remove registries just for testing purposes, right? It's much more dynamic, and that is one of the things that I personally am struggling. Like, unless we provide a way, because distributing the root with the client, I understand the kind of the need for that, I'm just struggling how that will work with this dynamic structure. Take, for example, I may decide that actually I do not want to trust the Docker root, right? So I need to be able to exclude that from kind of my trust policy on the client and say, I don't trust anything else than my own personal registry. That's it. And that's why I've been struggling. I saw that Milind actually showed up. I think he has also some thoughts around that.
Hey, Notary. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
I spent very little time thinking about this, but I think at a high level, I don't want to start from tough as a technical solution, and I think we are on the right track here, talking about problems to solve, and then we can talk about the technical strategy. And I think tough falls in the bucket mostly of public distribution or public registry based distribution. There's some applicability for enterprise internal signing and distribution as well. So I think I want to kind of start the discussion around, as a registry operator, as a public registry operator who wants to distribute images to various clients, what features can be uniformly provided through Notary Project? So again, some high level ideas there are, is there a standard scheme for supporting registry operator signatures versus author signatures who publish their images? How are these trust stores managed? Does notation have them baked in? There's a process to onboard your public registry root certificates with notation, and Toddy rightly pointed out, there needs to be easy way to say, now I'm dealing only with my internal images and I don't want to trust public registry certs. And I think the other part is, how do you do revocation? Either the registry owned keys or end author owned keys. Is there a way to, scalable mechanism? We can discuss about different options there. We might have to come up with something new, or rely on tough as a distribution mechanism. So I think those are the ideas at high level. I think another might be, and this gets into author signatures, which are more complicated than the registry operator signatures. Is it how do image authors or a vendor can uniformly prove their identity? I'm publishing my image to Docker, ACR, ECR, but I want to represent myself as just a uniform identity, not different things through different registries. Yeah, I think these are some of the high level problems to look at. There may be more. Yeah, those are my thoughts, Toddy.
So coming back to thanks, Milind. So coming back to especially this, do I trust the public ones or not? So one of the things that I see a lot of, at least our customers saying, they go through, take for example, they take images from Docker Hub, they import them into, let's say, Nexus or Artifactory inside their organization. They do some validation of their, for example, image, most often this is vulnerability scanning. And after that, they republish this image for internal use. And that is a very common kind of approach that we've seen across enterprises. What they say from there on is they say, look, I don't want anybody actually pulling from Docker Hub directly. Even like you guys are already have throttling on Docker Hub, so every enterprise says that impacts my availability, but also my security, because if somebody pulls from Docker Hub directly, I cannot scan it, right? I have no way to know like what is the security posture of that image. In order for them to kind of restrict that, they put all kinds of policies. And one of those policies, what they very often say is like, they don't want to, for example, allow trust for anything that is outside the organization, which means that as part of this import inside the organization, they resign the image, right? So they may trust it at the gate, right, at the first step. But once they actually import it inside, they say, I don't trust anymore anything that's outside. If it is signed with my key, I will allow it to run on the cluster. If it is not, then I'll drop it. And I see kind of this, I think we need to think of a way how enterprises and customers configure that trust without kind of bloating the clients with too much, let's say, certificates. That is at least my thought on the problem. The other thing is that very often enterprises say, I do not blankly trust the organization, right? Take, for example, Microsoft. So we've been discussing this with, let's say, images published on MAR. They say, I may actually, in order to follow the zero trust approach, I may say I trust only the .NET group in Microsoft. I don't want everything that, for example, is published by Microsoft to be trusted inside my organization. I trust .NET because they published all their, for example, processes for that, and that's it. Which means that it's not trust at the root, it's trust at some intermediate level, because, of course, the .NET certificate will be actually rooted at Microsoft certificate, but I want to actually restrict the trust on a more granular level.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple of things there, Toddy. The first one is that there's the security properties of tough and what that brings you can be seen as independent of any trust policy. You know, that gives you the integrity, gives you distribution, all the downgrades, attacks, and all that kind of stuff. And you need that. You need those semantics one way or another, regardless of your package manager and what you're doing. And I think you need that internally, and I think you need that in the public domain. And I think you also need that for distributing, updating, and maintaining trust policy for any other sorts of signing that you have. So in your internally in your company, if you only want to trust a particular subset of Docker official images mirrored to your JFrog registry that you've then signed with your own private keys in KMS or whatever it is, whatever you're using, then that's a matter of policy. You still have to create that policy and distribute it. And we're looking at that problem as something that you would do using Tough with a Rego policy embedded that will run across your images. So we're going to create run for Docker official images so that when people do Docker pull, that works. That doesn't mean that you should trust it. Like, it doesn't mean the software is good, but it does mean there is integrity. It doesn't mean that Docker built it. It does mean it's got all of the attestations that we said it should. And you can at least trust that bit. And so when it comes to doing that internally, it's a case of augmenting that policy and overlaying your own policy. And I think internal Tough that then delegates to Docker's Tough or some other, you know, whoever it is that you trust, is the way forward there. And so I think Tough and designing your own policy and putting it in there is the only real way to do it. Because I think internally enterprises have this policy distribution problem too. Maybe they think they don't, but they do. They have to try and get it into the Kubernetes cluster. They have to get it into their desktops. They do have that problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So, I like one of the things that at least is missing in my mind is like having a good example how this can be actually done. So if we have a good example, because I agree, and we've seen this problem with kind of distributing the policies. I want to also kind of bring back Bilin's question, like, okay, what will happen, for example, if, let's say, we discover that some of those images that, let's say, either the Docker official images or Microsoft .NET images are compromised, right? And we are not talking about the whole compromise and the whole chain compromised, like every image, which is kind of the SolarWinds example. So you need to wipe out everything and start over. You want to actually invalidate just certain images. And so mapping this example and how TUF can help us with that, that will be invaluable actually for kind of us and the enterprises.
I mean, that's great news because well, it's great to hear because that is that exact use case of identity, key, and particular artifact revocation is something that we're building for Docker official images. So we will have at least an example of that. And there's no reason that couldn't be applicable to other use cases. And out of that will come tools for publishing policy, consuming policy, and evolving policy. Because we're going to need that, and obviously we're going to open all of that up for Docker official images. So that might be a good basis. That work is coming along. We are working on it now, but it's just not there yet. I think it's fair to say.
So some thoughts on what both of you said. I agree with what Toddy said around when you're in a Kubernetes cluster, a production environment, customers definitely lock down access to public registry, any public registry. They use all means. Signature is the newest means to do that. Previously, they used network access control and other things like that. Which means they are only relying on their internal registry and nothing else. So that brings into picture, if TUF is used, that's like an out-of-band call to do updates. Is that channel even available at that stage? It may be available on developer desktops and other environments, but maybe not the production environment. I think that is one thing to as a consideration. The second part is we're talking about, I think in Open Pub Key, TUF is used, as I understand, for two purposes, distributing the root and distributing the revocation lists, possibly, I think, what is trusted as well, which is the trusted tags. And again, we have to contextualize that for those two use cases, me as a registry operator and me as a application owner. As a registry operator, you want a out-of-band mechanism where TUF fits well, like on startup or every execution, it's able to check is updated metadata available and from the original source, in this case, public registry, and get itself updated. I'm not sure that same philosophy applies to an application owner because and you can correct me here, like even for other kind of policy objects, Kubernetes based or like IAM policies, access control, anything, you would go through your regular application deployment mechanism, which is like your safe deployment mechanisms. Deploy it to a pre-prod, run test, bake it, go to the production. So you already have a predefined CI/CD based mechanism to push updates. And an out-of-band mechanism there to push your own trust policy. Revocation list is a different thing. Trust policies, which is saying what is to be trusted or not as baseline, and revocation kind of overrides some bits of that. I'm still not sure Tough fits in there because that's an out-of-band mechanism. You cannot control which environments, and even in environments, there's options like blue-green deployment, incremental, right? You want, in many places, you want precise control over how updates roll into your environment.
Yeah, there's a lot you said there. I mean, my thinking, and it's maybe not as far as yours, is that the if you expect to use so say for example you want to use Docker's tough root for Docker official images in your isolated Kubernetes environment, talking to your Artifactory or whatever, then you would keep that mirrored to your Artifactory. You would keep Docker's tough root mirrored, and that's native in the registry. So we're trying to build native representation of tough into the registry so that you don't need to have some other protocols or some other access or access to any other infrastructure or any other ACLs required. So it lives next to the data that you're pulling or the images that you're pulling. And so you would need to keep that up to date. And I think that's just the nature of tough. That there is freshness, and so it does need to be regularly kept up to date. And so I think if you want the secure updates, whether it be for policy or for your tags, then one way or another you need freshness, and that's that time-based signing. And I think that's pretty much inescapable, that we're going to have to find some way of getting that in. I mean the other option, of course, is for really truly air-gapped environments, is to extend that time, put it on a stick, and there's always that slow update mechanism a la tough via a USB stick. That's always feasible.
Try to go on. I'll go after you.
Yeah, maybe James, one of the things that I hear you, and correct me if I'm understanding that wrong, but you're saying that the whole tough data will be distributed within the registry, or somehow natively. Does that mean kind of the whole, let's say, root of trust will be part of the registry, the policies will be part of the registries? Is that what you're saying?
That's currently what we're doing. Yeah. So we have a working prototype where we're mirroring that stuff, just as tough. You've got root.json, snapshot.json, target.json. We're playing with that, but we think there's a better way of doing this, of representing the metadata directly in OCI indexes and annotations and so on. It's a content store. It seems a bit odd to be just crowbarring in some JSON files. So we're looking at how to do it better.
That's interesting, because actually we looked at that, and actually I don't know, Milind, whether we discussed that with you like a year and a half, 2 years ago. But the problem that we saw at that time was this kind of a reluctance to actually do a trusted, let's say, a first run, right? And maybe like once again, I need maybe more details, like how is, for example, if I have all this information in the registry, right, and I can easily replicate it between registries, so that I see where you're going with that thing. Why do I need to have something built into the client? Because I can do a like trust on first run, and that's kind of the most insecure call. But once you actually pass this call, from there on, you can actually continue to trust this registry. What we were struggling is how to make sure that when you do the first call to the registry to pull that metadata down, that you really can trust what you're pulling down.
Yeah, I mean that I mean I can't solve that problem for the world. I'd love to, but yeah, in the end, that's why we want to embed our own root in our own tools, because that way when people go to docker.com and download Docker Desktop, then they get our root. But in the end, you've got to trust the PKI that docker.com is good, and check the signatures. And that's just a hard problem on how to bootstrap. Tough doesn't solve that for you.
Yeah, go ahead, Milind.
Yeah, I think the pattern that we are seeing now. So if you just use stuff without having a baseline, that gets into tofu, which is problematic. I think more recently with Sigstore, the work that Docker is doing, I think that is the pattern. That seems to be the pattern around that, which is you ship an initial embedded trusted roots, etc., metadata, and then tough is the mechanism to update it. I think the larger concern is, and we have had discussions around this about 2-3 years back when we were evaluating different options and putting criterias around how we want this experience to be, is the portability, image signature portability, and how to handle this metadata. I think revocation list was one of the metadata in this bucket, and like one option was, and again, the kind of metadata we are talking about to be managed by Tough. Should it be stored in the registry? I think stored in the registry is better than having a separate Tough endpoint. But the distribution story, we talked about it, and it didn't seem feasible for having having that metadata automatically synced and distributed top down to various registries and being available. Like I would like to discuss that more. If I think we ended up in that discussion concluding that that didn't seem like a feasible way to distribute, because it seemed like either registries will have to implement new functionality which is not part of OCI if they wanted to take that burden off of end users, or end users will have to set up something on a per repository basis, maybe. So I would still like to discuss that and see if there are better ways. The user experience seemed problematic. It seemed like if you put the onus either on the registry operator or the end user, then they may not set this up, and then the value kind of goes away, or probably it'll break in very explicit. Either it fails silently or it breaks in very explicit ways.
Yeah, so I mean there are a couple of things there. So if we're signing tags in Tough somehow in the registry, then revocation is a case of like signing a new tag, right? And you're always moving forward. So that freshness gives you that. And so there's no extra metadata to how to revocation in that you replace it or remove it. There's no explicit revocation. Having said that, we're also signing attestations in the image, and there may be cases to revoke that which would require distribution of revocation lists independently, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think where I'm kind of in line with is using Tough to distribute trustors, revocation lists, etc., and that being distributed through the registry itself by some convention that the client knows or is standardized. So there it's like the Docker client or any other client talks to when it's interacting with Docker Hub, because the image is sourced from Docker Hub, it knows it needs to get that metadata from Docker Hub. But when that image moves internally or to your private registries, etc., I feel that's where it breaks down, because there is no standard mechanism to propagate this metadata. I think that is the piece I want to have more discussions around.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I mean, I'm hoping. Sorry, you go ahead, Toddy.
Yeah, I want to actually come back to something that you mentioned. Always moving forward. Is that true? Because I actually had quite some occasions where, like, either internal teams for Microsoft or customers are saying, well, we don't want to force somebody to upgrade. I am big supporter actually on the upgrades. I think that you should be on the latest and the greatest, but in the enterprises, there is a software like that runs on very old bits. And the moment you upgrade it, this software stops running. But you know this, like if it is running, don't touch it. Like whether it has security, that is a really separate question. But I heard quite a few occasions where people say, look, I cannot, or at least I cannot be forced to move at your pace. I can move, but I need more time. And if kind of the implementation that we provide is to say, well, you are forced to always move forward. I understand that they cannot move backwards, but they want to pin to some particular version for longer time that, let's say, we want them to.
Yep. I mean,
And
I think there are three things there though, right? So the first thing is a tagging strategy. If we need to support
Yeah.
people staying on old stuff, then we should keep tags around that are supported. And then the other thing is the whole point of tough for especially for trust policy distribution is that we are controlling the name to digest mapping. And if somebody decides to pin to a digest, I think they are saying, I have already decided to trust this thing. And I don't care about your signatures and your tough and any of your stuff because I'm now addressing a content store with a digest and I put that in my kube cluster and I don't want you touching it, then that's fine. I mean, nobody's going to break your workflow, but I think you're checking out of secure update mechanisms at that point. And I think that's a legitimate choice. And then when you next get a new tag and resolve another digest, then you have to go through that trust process again. And so I think I don't think we're breaking anybody, but if you put a tag in your ingress control and you use your fancy new ingress controller to update it, then you're going to get updated. So it's one or the other. You can't have your cake and eat it, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another thought that I had is about like how do you decide which tag is the one after the next one, or which digest is one after the next one? That is one of the things that also there is a lot of struggle. We started annotating images with kind of additional metadata to say, okay, this is the successor from that image, right? By using the tagging convention, so looking at actually how crazy the tagging conventions are in the industry, you don't have like, nobody, for example, follows Semver tagging, right? There are like all kind of crazy stuff that we investigated, and it's really hard to go and say, well, this version is after this version. And what you want to do is actually you want to keep people within certain lineage of tags, not actually to jump them across versions, like major versions, as in the Semver terminology. That is also one of the things that, especially around containers, is a little bit problematic. And that will be interested how to solve it with the metadata itself to say, you need to go from this tag to this tag, but not to that other tag, although that other tag is more recently published and actually it's a completely new version because you may break.
It's hard to know what to say except that I'm sorry. But yeah, I mean, this feels like an OCI engagement though, this one, right? In that we need extra fields and extra metadata and the ability to link things together in new and interesting ways. But yeah, although I don't, yeah, go on.
No, sorry,
go ahead,
on.
Milan.
No, just want to add to what Toddy said. I think it's absolutely important because that is the pattern that we see. Most enterprise customers, you don't want anything to be updated in production without visibility or behind the scenes. That's usually like all kind of updates go through very controlled and visible mechanisms. Where I definitely see value is at where the public image initially gets ingested at development time, at third-party import time, whatever process a customer has. But there should be explicit mechanisms to opt out of that when you're running the same tools or mechanisms in production. Right, like even if it's a minor version, things can break. There are plenty of examples of that. Or even a patch fix, a bug fix.
Yep. Yeah. Go ahead, James.
Well, I'm curious, and I totally recognize that enterprise story, and that's very much my background. But I'm curious as to what extent that is born, that behavior comes from a lack of good supply chain in any of the software that's being consumed, and the lack of actual verifiable attestations. So imagine if you could download an image and realistically rebuild it from source, from the Git commits. Think about the Nix world where you do actually have reproducible builds of everything. No, we're not there, and the enterprise is miles away from that. But the behaviors of being cautious and not staying up to date is because there are very good reasons for doing that, because it breaks things. It's not trustworthy. You don't know what you're going to get. There's all sorts of good reasons for that, but they do seem like fixable things. They're things that we can improve. What would it take to get to a point of trust whereby the enterprise would trust Microsoft to update its .NET images without breaking? So right now, my laptop auto updates. I trust Microsoft to do that now. I know enterprises don't on the whole, but and we didn't used to trust Microsoft. I used to choose my updates, but now it largely works. And so we may get closer towards this with cloud software and enterprise software.
I can take a shot at that. Mm-hmm. I don't think the challenge is trustworthiness or is this software good. Signatures solve that. Previous to signatures, people would just trust based on the location or the source. The challenge is, the software is what the publisher says to be. Attestations prove some provenance, it went through some scans, etc. It's the publisher signed off on it and said through provenance or attestations, here's all the things that I did. You can check this. So it's not about quality. It's about how that piece of software interacts with all the other software that I have in my environment as dependencies. And that is very contextual to each application. And that needs to be validated by each customer by whatever means they have. Generically, like applies to anything, right? Like packages, libraries, etc. Any piece of software is interacting with other things. And the risk around this is when things break, it is impacting your production availability, etc. So I don't see that behavior changing. That it might get more efficient based on where enterprises are in their maturity. Either they have organization level processes to keep on updating their dependencies, but those dependencies get updated on the leftmost side of the CI/CD, right? At ingestion, updated into your internal repositories for development. They don't get updated on the production side of things because there are just too many things to verify. So it's not about, do I trust this software? Does this software play well with other stuff that I have? Toddy.
Yep. Yeah, I actually agree with both of you. Like from one side, yeah, Milind, you are correct that it's very contextual to the application. On the other side, like I am also kind of a proponent of really teams should not be staying on old software, right? That means that like you need to move to something newer, and especially like hearing some examples where we had a customer who was on, let's say, .NET 2 point something, which is actually out of support for many years, but they are still using it. So I don't think that this should be the behavior that we promote, and we really need to educate, as James saying, the whole industry to say, look, you need to actually get more up to date or be at the latest and greatest as soon as possible. One of the, and I think that moves us away from the tough conversation, but I don't think that tough, for example, solves even the reproducible builds, James, that you mentioned. So in general, enterprises are not interested in building from source as long as they trust. So I cannot take, for example, Microsoft, the amount of software that we use internally, we need, and if we want to build everything from source, that will be enormous task. I don't think that we, despite the fact that we are kind of $1 trillion company, can achieve that. Yet other enterprises, in general, other enterprises, they are interested to take the software and use it in its built kind of form, not to build it from source. That if we are going in that direction, that will be a long way until we get there, and I don't see it happening. So we need to figure out how we can actually provide this trust in the form of, let's say, already packaged software. But this needs to also include some information about the sources. And right now, I had some conversations with some folks, we are going into the direction to say, we will have reproducible builds, and we will add all the salsa provenance, and we'll add it as attestation. And one of the values that, or actually the reasons that kind of enterprises are looking at salsa in the way of, yeah, that's helpful, but I don't know how I'm going to use it, is because the questions that I hear from customers is they don't care about the actual Git commit or the actual build agent that build the software. And this build agent can be ephemeral, right? So you cannot even track it back, because you say, okay, those are the conditions that the build agent has. This is the Git commit that it built it. This is the ID of the build agent. And if that disappears, which very often happens, you cannot track it down except to use the Git commit. But very few software tools right now tell you, well, who made this commit? And most of the times, this commit is made by some automated account. And that's not what the enterprises are looking for. The enterprises are looking to point the actual person that did the commit. So that is another thing but this is more going into the attestations part that kind of was our second topic for discussion today, not so much on the tough side. But yeah, that's kind of at least my experience so far, talking with customers, looking at actually what we do internally, and kind of where the direction of the industry is going with the provenance stuff. If we solve kind of the provenance to give enterprises the information, this is the team that built this piece of software, and you need to go and actually hunt them down to fix it. That is what the enterprises are looking for. They are not interested in, for example, this is the build agent, because those are just GUID here, GUID there, and they cannot map these GUIDs to anything tangible right now.
I think on the update topic, I just wanted to make a point there that I absolutely agree. We want folks to be on the updated versions and not carry around risks associated with old software. The question is, who gets to enforce that? And what I'm saying is, it's usually somebody within an enterprise that controls that, and not a vendor. Vendor can give guidance, but they shouldn't be able to force you to update. In some environments that works, but in production, my view is that that usually doesn't work.
I'm totally with
Hey,
you.
Dave.
I'm just sorry. Go ahead, Tolly.
No, sorry, you are.
I was just going to say that the industry is moving towards that, though, I think, where people are expected to maintain good contracts and good APIs. So, for example, you can pay AWS to automatically upgrade or Google to upgrade your kube clusters whilst your app's not going down. And I know that's like the PaaS layer, and it's not the same as the binary coupling in a Docker image, but you can imagine a world where it's totally fine to upgrade libSSL in your Java app and expect it not to break or roll it back if it does. So I think there are scenarios where staying up to date automatically in production does work, and we should and must get better at that because, like, as Toddy was saying, we can't just have everyone pinning things because they don't update it. They don't, most of all, they don't know what's running, let alone be able to update it for getting to a point where we're
Yeah.
automatically updating our software because we trust, and I don't mean it in the cryptographic sense, we trust the supplier not to break the software because there's a well-defined API that's been tested and it's loosely coupled and we can rely on it. And we are, as an industry, getting better. Our phones do it. OSs are beginning to do it. Ubuntu does live kernel patching now. I don't know if it's any good.
I think definitely applicable in certain contexts, right?
Yeah.
Like how visible that, like, do customers have to opt into that behavior? How visible that is? What is the scope of those updates? Like if it is limited to Docker official images and there is a defined guarantee or assurances there, and the customer is able to say, yes, I trust this mechanism.
I think that James, related to what you said, so everybody wants that. The enterprises want that. However, enterprises would like to have certain control and visibility of how this is done, right? And also, the other thing that enterprises do not want is vendors like us to actually force them to do something that they are not ready to do. Which, like, take for example Kubernetes scenario. So Kubernetes support is only 1 year. Every enterprise said that is not enough for us. It takes us longer to actually move between Kubernetes versions, especially with the breaking changes that you do between those versions. That's why now there is this whole effort about long-term support for Kubernetes that's going on to at least increase it to 2 years, because enterprises said, no, that's not sustainable for us. If you want your kind of open source project to continue to succeed, you need to be more reasonable with that, because that can either make or break the technology, right? If you continue to push the enterprise, they may say, look, it looks good, Kubernetes is great, but I cannot keep up with the pace. I've heard people saying, I don't like Kubernetes. I don't want to maintain it. It's too expensive for me, and I cannot actually constantly have a team upgrading my Kubernetes cluster, because that's what it comes to. Just to kind of play the devil's advocate.
Oh yeah, back in CNCF land, and
Yeah.
tough land, if we're signing tags with tough, and people don't want to update, then I think the idea that they dereference tags maybe in ingress into their internal system, like I think that's what you're saying, Milind, and publishing to their internal registry or bringing into their CI, maybe that's the time where they then take the digest and that's what goes through to production. That's the pattern that we think makes sense. And that way you don't need tough in production. You don't need all of that stuff because you're referencing everything by digest. And signature verification and attestations make less sense there, right? Because you should be signing those commits to your kube specs and all of that good stuff anyway.
Yeah, and I think some thoughts around that is, I think notation, we can think about how notation supports that import scenario where you are able to say, I'm ingesting this image, verify it. And I don't think usually it is, okay, I verified it, I'm going to sign it. Usually I have my own internal vetting steps asynchronously, and then I re-sign it. But it's good to surface those concepts through the CLI, etc. All right, we got few minutes left. I wanted to ask, I see two buckets here. The attestations, with I think is a less contentious discussion, and there's what I'm viewing this bucket as is features for public registry. How do we want to proceed here? What are the next steps?
I'll be curious, actually interested to work with you, James, and kind of getting through those scenarios. So I see the value of TUF, right? And I actually, as I mentioned, so we were looking at this idea how we can actually distribute the metadata as part of the registry. That is actually very interesting for us to work on. And
do
I'll
you
be
have
happy
any...
to.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, do you have any prior art or documentation? Because I did scour the web before I started doing it myself to see if I could find much, and there are a few remnants of some things out there, but not much.
No, we do not have publicly available kind of documentation for that, but we had internal discussions. I can eventually kind of look around and create some document, but if you have started already something that you want to share with TUF, I'll be happy to kind of contribute to that part.
Let's just do that then. Yeah. I'm hoping to have something by well, actually their meeting's tomorrow, I think. I may or may not put something on the agenda for tomorrow.
I need to get that on my calendar. So,
well, they keep
but
moving
my
around.
suggestion,
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
My suggestion here is, I think I would like to see kind of the list of use cases, and then say TUF addresses these, and then these are the other areas we want to work on.
I was gonna add to that because I have not kind of seen a good list of use cases, at least from TUF side, to say, okay, those are the things that we want to address. Because so far, what they have is really, if you have this tightly controlled chain and you have really predefined paths on how the things are going, let's say from the root down to, let's say, mirrors of package managers and so on and so on. And
I think I'm suggesting slightly different, basically taking a step back. And let me know if you agree or not. That basically write the use cases as a registry operator, I want to do this. And then TUF is the answer for some of them. But I think there are other pieces. There may be some changes in signature format to include additional metadata. There may be updates to our existing trust policy to explicitly differentiate some of these things. Updates to our trust store, how we store it and classify it in Notary project. So, and TUF addresses one part of it, but I feel there are other pieces here.
Makes sense. Okay. That's a good discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Folks. Have a nice day.
Cool. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.